We talked about personality as a key deep level diversity dimension of teams and how team personality impacts conflict, team functioning, and ultimately performance. Another deep level diversity dimension that I want to talk about is values. And values are non-observables. They're personal. We also many of our values come from cultural traditions and histories that we've been part of. And so I want to talk about how we think about values in teams. And I'm going to have you map your team on the individuals and what you think of their values. And ultimately try and diagnose how variability or diversity in values ultimately impacts team functioning and performance. So when we think about values, what do we mean by values? And what are the different types of values that people around the world hold in common and that maybe are different as well? And so one of the frameworks that I often use is Schwartz. Schwartz is a researcher who does a lot of work on values and different cultural dimensions around the world, trying to discern what values do we hold in common, what values are different when we look at different cultures and nations around the world. And what you'll see here are dimensions such as tradition, conformity, security, power, achievement, what Schwartz calls hedonism, stimulation, universalism, benevolence, and so on. And you can see the spectrum or the circumplex that Schwartz has developed on the different values that people hold. And what he's found is, on average, people across the world hold these values. These are fairly universal. It's just depending on what culture or nation or group we're talking about. Some values are held stronger and some values are held weaker than others. So this gives you at least a framework for thinking about the values that might be present among individuals within your team. Another very similar set of values was developed by Hofstede and colleagues over time. And here I'm giving you just one version of the output of their work, and it lists, depending on where you are in the world, Latin America or South Asia, North America, and so on, where you might fall in terms of these different value sets. But importantly, when we look at Hofstede's value dimensions, what we find is there are really 5 core dimensions to analyzing values in any society, or in your case, in your team. So the first one is what we call power distance, high power distance or low power distance. So in power distance, for example, if you are my boss and I am high on power distance, a value that I hold is I hold you up here on a pedestal, and the separation between you and me is much greater than in societies where power distance is quite low, where even if you are my superior, I see us as more equals or peers, and that power distance is much lower. And societies differ on that tremendously. I do a lot of work in East Asia, Indonesia, Korea, and so on. And these are societies that have a really high power distance set of values, as opposed to in the U.S., for example, where on average power distance relative to other societies is much lower. Individualism or collectivism. So again, the UK, the United States, Australia, much more individualistic cultures relative to East Asia, Asia generally, the Middle East, certain parts of South America, which generally are more collectivistic. Individualism is people tend to focus on the individual and what individuals value. Collectivistic cultures tend to focus on what's best or appropriate for the group as opposed to individuals. The third dimension here, masculinity or femininity, is not about gender. It's not about being male or female in terms of gender, but it's about the values that are associated with those different genders. And so as a man, I can hold certain values that tend to be associated with more feminine association. Or even as a woman, one might hold values that tend to be associated with more masculinity. And so that's another value dimension. Fourth is uncertainty avoidance. This is really our tolerance for ambiguity or uncertainty. In certain cultures, we are very avoidant of uncertainty, and so we're high uncertainty avoidance. In certain cultures, we are low uncertainty avoidance. We're okay with uncertainty and ambiguity, and we don't avoid it. Again, your team members are going to differ on all of these. Last but certainly not least is long-term or short-term orientation. I would encourage you to think about where you fall on each of these value dimensions. Again, you can go online and there are a number of free assessments that you can use to assess where you are at on these dimensions. But importantly, I'd like you to think about your team. Again, using the same profile assessment that we've been using for personality, demographic diversity. Again, here we want to analyze where do our team members fall in terms of values and where are the differences? What level of diversity do we have? Are we on average high or low on each of these dimensions of power distance, individualism, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity, long-term versus short-term orientation? Again, if you're in one team or one group, do it for that one team. If you're in multiple groups or teams, do it for all of them. But what I want you to do is really think carefully about each of your team members. And again, you're making assumptions. You have intuitions based on working with these individuals and your own value set. Where does each member fall? And where's the diversity in your team? And how would you assess your team overall in terms of, are we higher in terms of power distance or are we lower in terms of power distance? Are we more individualistic or are we more collectivistic in our team? Take a few minutes on your own and assess your team. And then go to the discussion forum, share some of the observations that you've had about your team. What did you learn about your team? How do these differences or similarities in values, do you think impact your team's functioning? Share with your classmates, learn from their experiences, and then come back and I'll share with you some of the data, some of the research that we've been doing on teams and values, and ultimately how values and diversity in values can impact teams and their performance.